Hello boys and girls, today I'm going to deal with a very contentious subject, a difficult subject about how the changes happened in Kibbutzim and how they impacted individual members and their sons and daughters of the Kibbutzim. Change hurts, no matter what the size of any organization or business is. Change hurts. People are made redundant. Less profit requires corporate restructuring. The business and service industries of Kibbutzim too had to undergo serious heart surgery in the 80s and 90s. When we made this change to differential salaries, the change hurt many people. The Kibbutzim had been going down the toilet rapidly. Many were facing bankruptcy, and I talked about this in episode 1. I gave the outline, the framework, but I didn't talk about how it affected people individually, because here I'm not talking about the why and the how, but about the effect it had on individual members. The longer that some kibbutzim had existed for 40, 50, 60 or more years, the harder it would be to break that mold and make the change. As members aged, the harder it was to accept the need for change. After acceptance of the need, it was even harder to actually get their heads into a newer mindset and make the change in practice. Now, why did it hit some people harder than others? Well, the kibbutz is an extended family, and in every normal family you have some people who are the leaders. You have those who are the doers and those who do less, and you also have supported people by the doers. It's no difference in the kibbutz family. In the traditional kibbutz, it was very convenient for some members, and they fell into a certain trap. Quote, I receive an equal personal budget like everyone else, no matter what work I do, where I work, and I will still receive the same allowance. So why should I work longer hours? Why should I take extra responsibility? Yes, there were members like this too in kibbutzim. There were members who limited the work contribution. In town, you call this the 9-5-0 approach. Go to work at 9, finish at 5, and do nothing in between. Anyway, in kibbutz, there are certain people like this as well. This type of person lives side by side with others who are working very, very hard. A strong core of people were actually running the show. They took on greater responsibility. I'll talk about this later in another blog in which I examine certain positions of people who didn't really pull the weight. Well, anyway, the age group that really felt the crunch when we moved over to differential salaries was the age group of basically those over the age of 35 or 40 up to retirement age. There were many people in this group who were threatened by suddenly facing the prospect of, does my workplace justify my standard of living? In other words, am I financially viable? There were people under threat in the internal services of the kibbutz, in agriculture, in education, and in the different industrial enterprises of the kibbutz. Now, having mentioned industry in kibbutz, I have a little story to tell you. A good friend of mine, he used to tell this story of, he said, well, one day I went down to the factory and I was just looking around, and I came across two guys who were sitting on the floor with their backs against the building, and I went up to them and I started talking to them. So I asked the first one, I said, tell me, where do you work in this industry? What do you do? And he answered, he said, well, to tell you the truth, I don't do anything. I said, okay. Well, I turned to the other guy and I asked him the same question. What do you do in this factory? And he said, you know, I don't do anything. So having heard that, I went up to the office, to the factory management. I managed to talk quickly with the factory manager, and I said to him, you know, you have to fire some guys in this factory. He said, why? Well, basically, I just found 2 people who are doing the same job. But seriously, one result of introducing differential salaries, that there were many people were fired from their jobs. Just imagine that for one moment, that you've worked all of your life and you haven't saved any nest egg. No money at all for a rainy day. No big personal assets to fall back on. One day you're working in a job, and then the next day the work manager invites you to a meeting and he says, after various explanations and hums and haws, he said, I'm very sorry, you have to leave your job. Of course, that didn't happen overnight. It was a long and painful process. I've only very briefly hit on 1 or 2 points here of creating the framework of differential salaries. There's a heck of a lot more, and it goes very, very deep into the psyche of kibbutz and individual people here. The next major issue of the change was privatization of communal assets. In other words, ownership of one's own house, and in some case, distribution of other communal assets, such as the dining room or even the laundry or anything else. In order to achieve this by communal consent, a majority of members had to vote for it. This was a long, hard, and complex issue.
Of privatization, that is, taking the total community assets and dividing them up amongst the members. Part of this was very difficult, to say the least, because of course you won't start dividing up an orchard or a dairy or a beef herd, but nevertheless solutions were found along the way. But the major issue, of course, in privatization was the house in which one lived and the plot upon which the house was built. This was now going to go over to in the name of the people living in that house. This was a very complicated issue. We needed to do a whole Excel of balances between those people in small houses who'd lived here a long time and those people in large houses who had only been here a short time. Seniority became the key to work this whole thing out. But eventually, one way or another, we worked it out. Well, like I say, it was a question of balancing out between all the different members according to the size of the house and their seniority on the kibbutz. It didn't go easy. It took her 2 or 3 years to work it all out.
Was there any jealousy involved? The people who'd been here longer?
I'm not sure I'd call it jealousy, but there are in some cases
conflict,
where people got small plots because that's all they could have, because that's where their house was.
Yeah.
And it might have been surrounded by paths and so on. And some people got large plots. I wouldn't call it quite jealousy, but there was a feeling of unfairness.
Yeah, okay.
But we balanced that out financially. That is, those with large plots, with large houses paid into the fund, and those with smaller plots and maybe smaller houses received from the fund. It wasn't large sums of money, but at least it was some sort of compensation.
Each kibbutz had to decide how and when it should be done. Suddenly, people realized that the house where they were living till then had been owned by the kibbutz, and suddenly they realized that their house had a monetary value. They also knew that their parents' house had a monetary value, and their inheritance of that house could be translated directly into cash. Now, this was absolutely phenomenal, a change of a mindset here, whereby the kibbutz had owned everything till then, and then suddenly people were talking about, wow, out of the blue, I can own my own house. In order to implement this practice, a timetable had to be fixed. This led to what became known as the Day of Reckoning, in Hebrew, Hayom HaKovea. The Day of Reckoning meant that there had to be a cut-off date. After this date, either members would be entitled to their own homes or would be entitled to inherit the homes of their parents. But what happened to members who had left their kibbutz before that cut-off date, before the Day of Reckoning? Well, very simply, they were disenfranchised from property. Maybe they had received financial compensation as a member leaving the kibbutz, so much money, not a lot, but it was far less than the value of their former home. And what about the value and the monetization of the parents' home? I will do my very best to present this very difficult issue in my next blog, which is entitled A Travesty of Justice in Kibbutzim. A son of Kibbutz Givat Chaim Ichud has written to me about this issue. His name is Amram Landsberg Bar. He lives overseas. The script is his own words and not mine. I haven't changed a single sentence, and I'm presenting it from his point of view. He describes how his father gave the best years of his life working in the kibbutz, and he also talks about the money, the reparations from Germany that his father handed over to the kibbutz. Following the Holocaust, I think it was in 1952 or 1953, Germany started an agreement to pay reparations to people who had lost families, property, and everything else. Amram's father had received reparations from Germany. As a loyal member, he handed over all of that money to the kibbutz. I don't know how much it was, but I'm sure we're talking about tens of thousands of marks or euros or dollars. Amnon's father died in 1986. The Day of Reckoning, from what I understand, in Givat Chaim Ichud was in the year 2004. And that's when they drew the line in the sand. The kibbutz decided that Amram, like others who had left the kibbutz, were unentitled to a share of the monetization of houses or other communal assets. And remember that Amram's father had received lots of money in various stages as reparations from Germany. He'd handed it over to the kibbutz, and he'd worked hard all of his life as one of the early pioneers of building the kibbutz. In other words, he contributed his time and cash to the kibbutz. All of this is in the next episode. Watch a travesty of justice in Kibbutzim, because it happened in all the Kibbutzim that made the change. Form your own opinion. Comment below here, and when you see the next episode. And I really hope that I will receive an official response, or maybe even private members' responses from people in Givat Chaim Ichud. I earnestly want to present both sides of this story. Anyway, we'll see what will happen. Till then, keep well. See you then. Shalom and Leitraot. Oh, and one last thing I want to say before I go is that I haven't met Amram. I've never seen him. I actually haven't even received a photo from him. The correspondence between myself and him started in February, and we exchanged quite a few long emails until the month of May. It's now the 28th of May. So all I can say is I have to take Amram at face value. I'm not being judgmental about him or judgmental about Givat Chaim Ichud, because this issue of the Day of Reckoning has occurred in many, many kibbutzim, where in fact they drew the line, as I said, in the sand, before which there were people who were not part of, let's call it, the deal, or they remained unenfranchised, and after that certain date, others have been entitled to monetization of their houses and maybe other communal property as well. So all I'm saying is that I'm not giving my opinion at the moment about this one way or the other, but I would want to hear from you, the people, the viewers of this channel, what you think about it. And more important, because in fact I'm presenting Amram's point of view, I really want to hear from people in Givat Chaim Ichud if this is the way it was and is, and whether in fact they agree or disagree with Amram. So viewers, it's up to you. I hope everybody will write their comments once I upload the video, which is the next one after this. Hopefully I will upload it probably within 1 week of this episode. So all the best to you. Keep well, keep smiling, and shalom and leitraot. Bye for now.